In this video, we're going to outline how we can make collectibles and a simple and easy inventory. This isn't going to be a very sophisticated type of inventory system. It's going to only meet the needs of what we need it to for our particular project. But it will help you learn how to keep object permanence throughout our levels and only get them to spawn in if they've not been collected. We're also going to take a look at creating an inventory manager so we can keep track of those collectibles and how we can use our UI to create a more informative experience for the player. All right, so why don't we just get started? We're first going to make our collectible prefab. All right, so we actually need an object in our scene that the player can interact with and collect. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out by creating an empty game object. I'm going to name this collectible. And we're going to add a few things to it. We're going to add a sphere collider. And as far as how big it is, that should be good. Click the edit collider. Not bad. Why don't we go ahead and reset this in the center of our grid as well. I just like working in the center here. Let's see. I'm going to take my house and make a new layer. Well, no, I don't want a new. Here we go. There's layers. And call this environment. And I'm going to assign house to environment right there. All the children. And we'll just hide it. And I'm going to bring back my grid. So now we have a pretty simple scene to work with here. All right. So there's my collectible. I got my trigger collider set on it. And I actually need to create a second game object here. And we'll call this model or something like that. And this is what we will parent our particle systems to, our game model, anything we need like that. All right, so why don't we go ahead and find and make sure it's set to 0. So we want both of these things right in the center of the grid. Why don't we go ahead and find an object? So I'm going to look up cheese. This is going to be an odyssey of cheese throughout my level. So, you'll go around and we'll pick up cheese slices. And then sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll find a big old cheese. So big cheese is going to be my unique collectible, and little cheese is going to be kind of just sprinkled out collectibles to the level that'll increase my count. All right, so I just kind of drug those out and put them in my scene so I can kind of get rid of this search. And what we're going to do is I'm going to create, I'm going to actually put these in my prefabs for now, so I can get to them later because I know those. Let's do an original prefab. An original prefab. We'll delete them out of here. And I'm going to call this collectible big. So we'll zoom in there. And we'll call this other little small cheese collectible small. All right, cool. So I don't want to add any models to my collectible yet because I want to kind of make sure it's a template first. And to do that, we're going to have to add a script to it. All right. So we're going to go into our scripts. We're going to make a new C# script, and we're going to call this collectible. And after we make it, we're going to attach it to our actual model here. Well, not our model, but our empty game object of collectible. And there we go. We have our collectible script. And we'll worry about making the model after we add some functionality to our script. But it might be helpful, though, for testing purposes to go ahead and add a model here so we can kind of see what's going on here. So we can already instantly see, I'm glad we added one, because we see that when we bring our models in to the scene, that it's not exactly lined up in the center of the grid. So we're just going to put it, let's see, where's our collectible at? And there's our collider. Okay, maybe make the cheese a little bit bigger. It's a pretty big cheese. And let's adjust our collider. Let's give it a little bit of breathing room there. And now we have a model in here. And we're going to create this to say collectible small PFB, just to make sure we know that it's a prefab. And then we're going to drop it right into our prefabs folder. We'll come back and make the big one in a little bit. But I wanted at least a small one so we could start testing. Why don't we bring back our level now and see where we are in terms of what this looks like. So I'm going to bring it kind of close to my player camera. Nice. That cheese will do just fine. All right, so we've kind of made our prefab. We've got our script on it. Now we're actually ready to get into the code. So I'm going to click on my scripts folder and let's open up our collectible in Visual Studio. All right, let's clean it up a little bit. And what we're going to do is add the following variables to start out with. So what we want to do is make a identifier for this collectible, because the way we're going to set up our collection method is every collectible is going to have a unique number attached to it. So 0, 1, cheese 3, cheese 4. So what we're going to do is make a public int and call this identifier number. And we'll make another public variable, public bool. And this is going to tell us if this certain collectible is like a unique collectible. Maybe you have some things in your level that'll open a certain door, or maybe you have some things that require certain graphics, like a special graphic. Very specific collectibles in your level. This will be used to identify that. So we'll just call it unique, like so. All right, so the next thing we got to do is check for player collision with the collectible. So we'll say void on trigger, enter. We just want to test the first collision, and we're going to do a few things in here. We're going to first make sure that if other.gameObject compare tag player, right? We only want to make sure our player is colliding with it. That's just a good habit to get into. There's no other objects moving around in our scene, but in future times you may have NPCs, and if you don't specify what objects are colliding, then an NPC could collect our collectible for us. So we're just going to go ahead and assume that in the future NPCs will be added to our level, or other moving objects, for instance. Anything that can collide with our collectibles. So we're only going to grab our player, and inside here we're going to do a few things. So let's make some comments so we can kind of get some structure in our code. We're going to make a call to our inventory manager we're about to build to update our collectible count. And then we're also going to make a call to another call to our inventory manager to mark this object as collected, like we've already gotten it. And what we're going to do, a third thing, is a call to our UI manager that updates our count and other UI images. And then after we do all those things, we're going to make this guy disappear. We're going to say game object. So we're going to point at our game object dot set active equals false. So we don't want to destroy our game object. We want to just set it to inactive. Oh, we just want to set it to inactive because it's less expensive to enable and disable objects rather than just outright destroy them. Accessing memory like that can chug something along. All right, so we can't really get into these calls right here, so we'll have to come back until we make our inventory manager and our updates to our UI manager. But what we can do is test our collision by seeing if our objects disappear when we collide with them. All right, so what we're going to do next is test our collision. So I'm going to grab this collectible right here, and we'll put it inside of a room. Let's turn my lights on so I know exactly how much light this cheese is getting. So we'll put a cheese in front of the bookshelf, or maybe right on the table there. I don't know. If your colliders are big enough, we should be able to collect that. And I'm going to rotate it so it looks delicious. All right, so let's spawn into my scene here. And what should happen is this piece of cheese should disappear when we collect it. So it took a little bit of collision, but we got it to disappear. All right, so we're working pretty good, and I'm going to readjust this a little bit. I might go in and let's go to our prefabs and make a prefab change on this. So if we double click on prefabs, we go to this prefab scene. And I think what we're going to do is let's make that collision pretty big, so the player has a little bit more of a chance to collide with it, but not so big that he will accidentally collect it by just accidentally bumping into it. So I'm going to send that back to 0.4. All right, perfect. So now my radius is updated to 0.4 in my inspector because I kind of updated it in my prefab. So let's test that. I'm going to set this to 0.41 just to be angsty about it. Oh, 0.41. So if you update your prefabs by double clicking them in your project folder, it'll make sweeping changes to all your prefabs already in your scenes. That's the beauty of prefabs. Why don't we test it again to check our collision? Oh, that's a lot better, right? All I had to do was just go right to it, and I got my cheese on. All right, perfect. So we've got our collectible made. Now we just need to create some managers and update some managers. All right. So we're going to create an inventory manager. Okay. So we're going to start by creating another empty game object, and we're going to make another type of manager class. We have a game manager, a UI manager. Now we're going to make an inventory manager. Inventory manager. And why don't we just position it up here with our other managers? Let's organize a little bit. I can live with that. All right. So our inventory manager will be right here. We're going to make a new script now, and let's call it inventory manager. All right, nice. So let's open it up. And we have a few things that we want to do with our inventory manager. We want to keep track of which items have been collected, and then we want to keep track of the number of items that have been collected, and we want to have a spawn in quotations function that on every scene load will not make the things we've collected appear in the level. I use my wording very wisely there. You'll see what I mean by that. And then a public tally function that updates our inventory count so we can call that from our collectible script. So, our call to our inventory manager to update our count, and then our call to our inventory manager to mark it as collected. That's what we need to achieve here. All right, so why don't we get started on that? So the first thing we're going to do is make this a singleton type class. So we're going to say public static inventory manager, give it a name of instance equals null. We've seen this in the previous videos, but basically this will keep our object in our scenes between instance load or scene load. So we're going to say if our variable doesn't have a value yet, which means it's basically the beginning of the game, we're going to make this a don't destroy on load object, and we're going to reference our game object that this class is connected to. So we won't destroy our inventory manager between scenes now. And we're going to set instance equal to this. So if we load into another scene that might have an inventory manager object in it, we'll know that we already have one rolling. So if both of these scripts read this class, both of these objects read this script out, then the imposter is going to see this else, and he's going to destroy himself. All right. Why is that? The story. I always type it like that. It's not, my fingers have dyslexia. All right. So now we should have a inventory manager that persists throughout our levels. Why don't we try that out? But you'll notice in my inventory manager, I don't have my script attached yet. I'm just going to drag it over there and see what happens. All right. So we're going to hit play. I'm going to go ahead and pause because we know if we zoom in on my hierarchy right here, anything that doesn't get destroyed on load will exist here. And there's my inventory manager. That's proof enough for me. Next, we're going to keep track of how many collectibles we'll collect through our scene, through our inventory manager. So what we're going to do for that is we're going to make our first variable. I'm going to make it public for debugging purposes. I can go back and make it private. In fact, I might make a note, make private right there. So we'll call this a, let's get rid of that. I don't know what happened there. Public int. Okay, get out of here. Public int collectible count is what we'll call it. All right, and it'll automatically initialize to 0. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make our public function that will update our public count every time we collect a collectible. All right, so we can do something like public void tally. Let's call this function tally, like so. And what if some collectibles were worth more points than others, right? It might be nice to be able to take that in, take that number in. So we'll say int, let's say value param, and then what we'll say is collectible count equals our previous collectible count plus our value param. And what this variable is, we're going to pass a value param in from our collectibles. Ooh, let's go ahead and set that up. So in our collectibles, we'll just make simply a another public int, and we'll call this value. Simply put, like that. And now we can actually go ahead and take out that comment and say inventory manager dot instance dot tally, and we're going to pass in our value. So this way, some collectibles can be worth 1, some can be worth 5. So like if you had apples or coins, you could have like a money sack that'll be worth more, or just a single coin that's worth just 1 coin, something like that. So what we're trying to do is add a lot of flexibility for our level designers, right? Give them as many tools as possible with as many exposed variables as possible so they can create all kinds of experiences for our player. So back over in our inventory manager, we now have our collectible count increasing every time we pick something up. All right, this might be a good time to go ahead and test. So I'm going to take that down, and why don't we go and look at my small cheese now. And what we see here is a new variable here. We're going to label our cheese as 0 and give this a value of 1. And it is not unique. It'll just be an everyday cheese slice. All right. So what we should see on our inventory manager now is when we collect that cheese, we should see our count increase by 1. In fact, why don't we sprinkle a few cheeses in the level? I don't want to spend too much time setting this up, but a little bit of showmanship might be nice. So we'll put some cheese right there, and put a cheese on the chair. That's everybody's favorite game. Ooh, what about cheese on the thing? That's a good cheese. That's a good thing. I think it's like a little footstool or a little end table. Very quaint. All right, so we have some cheeses in our level that we need to collect. So let's go get that cheddar. All right, so let's maximize on play. Actually, why don't we minimize on play? So I'll control shift and pause. And what I want to do is be able to view my collectible count right here. So let's see if it'll go up as we play our level. That's a 1 cheese. That's the 2 cheeses. And that's the 3rd cheese of my heart. All right, so our collectible count is working a-okay. All right, now we're going to get to the part where we can keep track of which collectibles have been gathered and which haven't. So we can spawn the collectibles in the scene that haven't been collected and make sure the ones we've already gotten aren't there anymore in our game. All right, so let's make our scene view a little bit bigger. Okay, so this is primarily going to be inside of our inventory manager. We're going to start out by creating a pretty weird array. So what we're going to do is call this a public bool, and we're going to make an array. So let's add those brackets there, and we're going to say collected items, and that's what we'll call our array. And what this array is going to do, let me go ahead and minimize and let's compile that. So what this is going to do is our collected items right here, we'll have to set the size ourselves. All right. So I have 3 collectibles in my scene right now. I got them labeled, and I got 0, 1, and 2 elements in my array that we can check on or off. So what we're going to do is now we're going to go into each one of my collectibles and set its identifier number to how how it would be described over here in our index of our array 0, 1, 2, right? So I already have a 0 identifier on my first cheese. So let's go to my second cheese right here. I can see that my identifier is still 0, so let's set that to 1. And my third cheese, the Shadow Man, we're going to set its identifier number to 2. So we have 0, 1, and 2 cheeses, and guess what? They're going to perfectly sync up to 0, 1, and 2 collected. So at first, everything's going to be not collected, and as we get a cheese, boom, we got that cheese, we got that cheese, then we got that cheese. And since this script will persist between scene loads, we'll be able to keep track of our inventory in that manner. And it all depends on how many collectibles you have in your scene. You might have 5, you might have 20. So we need to go in and make sure we have enough booleans for every single collectible in our scene. But for right now, let's keep it at 3 because it seems to be working pretty good. And why don't we actually go in, and I'm going to save this, and I'm going to put some cheeses in my other scene so we can demonstrate that concept. So here's my other scene. Let's go to my prefabs and get my collectible small in here. All right, pretty good. So we'll put some cheese. Oh, make sure we don't grab what we're not supposed to. So I'm going to put some cheese on the counter, like so. Maybe closer to this side so we can collect it easier. And cheese on a chair. I still want to be stupid like that. All right. So it's kind of butted up against the post. That's a big old cheese. And let's make a cheese on that table right here. It's good enough for me. And let's put, this is going to be the tricky cheese. We're going to put this cheese right there, hidden among other goods. Does your eye work good? All right, and what we're going to do now is we're going to go through and set their values. So let me go in and clean up my inventory or my outliner here. So we start off with collectible small right here. All right. So now we got to decide how we want them to be kind of uh, labeled throughout our scene. So let's zoom in on some of these values right here. Identifier number. So why don't we start with 3 since our cheese 2 was in the other scene. We're just going to keep counting up. It's got a value of 1, right? And then chair cheese will be what, 4 maybe with a value of 1. Yeah, 3, 4, 5. Oh, that's a 4. 5 with a value of 1. And then old 60 over here with a value of 1. So I'm just basically going through and selecting all my cheeses, giving them unique identifiers that will, again, pertain to Let me go ahead and save the scene. Don't forget to save after you put your collectibles down. And let's just test the tally function here. So I'm going to select my inventory manager. I already have a problem, see? I no longer only have 3 cheeses in my entire game. I have 7. So let's undo that. And now we're going to make 7 cheeses. So my array size is 7, but remember we count from 0. And I definitely remember having a cheese 6 that I input. All right, perfect. And when we go through our game, our collectible count should count up to about 7. So let's test it. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. All right. So we get a cheese. Collectible count 1, 2, 3. Let's go to the next scene. We get 4 cheeses, 5 cheeses, 6 cheeses, 7 cheeses. So boom. So what we're trying to accomplish is every time we get one of those cheeses, we get a little fire off of our little arrow here telling us what we've collected. All right, so let's unplay that. Everything's working great so far. So what we want to do is go back to our inventory manager, and this is where our code gets a little bit tricky. All right, so we have our array called collected items. We have our count. You know what? I already know this works, so I'm going to make, you know what? I can't make that private because our UI is going to access this variable eventually. Keep it public. Our UI manager is going to need it. All right, and under tally, let's make a new function called public collected. No, let's call it public mark collected. Let's be very literal with our names. And it's going to take a variable called identifier param. And there we go. So whenever we call this, something wrong with that? Public void. Nice. So we're going to call this function from our collectibles. So we're going to say, we're back in my inventory script, inventory manager.instance.mark collected, and we're going to pass in for this one our identifier number. All right, we're going to pass in exactly what cheese this is. So is it cheese 6? Is it cheese 7? We're going to pass that in to our inventory manager, and we're going to catch it right here with our identity param. And we're going to go and we're going to say, what is we call our array? Collected items. And then which collected item? Well, it's going to match our identifier param equals true. So what we're doing is from our collectible, our identifier number here, remember we set our identifier, let it compile. We set our identifier right here, so this is cheese 0. And remember, that number corresponds to the element in our array, right? So when we want to say, well, which one do we need to mark true? Boom, we pass our identifier number, and we'll point to which index in our array with this code. All right, nice. Should work pretty good. So we call our mark collected function. We pass our identifier number. We catch our identifier number here with this parameter. We go to our array. We say which object in our array. Well, the same one that matches my identifier number. And we're going to check that box true, just like I showed us previously. So why don't we test that now? All right, so watch the booleans over here tick off as I collect them. All right, so boom, cheese 0. Why don't we get cheese, this third one first, so you see it's got that one. And then let's do a seed load. Boom, we still have track of which ones we've collected. So I'm going to get cheese 6. There's cheese 5 right there. And cheese 3. And cheese 4. Boom, all my items are collected now. but you'll see that they're still in the level, and my count keeps going up. They're already collected, so we got to fix that next. All right, so let's go back to our inventory manager, and now we need to have a spawn in quotation marks function that makes sure that those cheeses don't reappear after I already get them. All right, so let's make a new function, and what we're going to do is call it check collectibles. So let's say void. It's going to be private. We only use it in here. Check collectibles. Or you know what? Let's make it public. We might need to call this in our game manager every time we load into a scene, right? All right, check collectibles. Boom. So inside here, we got to basically check every single collectible in our scene to see if they've been collected or not. If they have been collected or not, say we got the cheese on the table and we load back in the scene, all we're going to do is just the collectible's still going to be in our hierarchy, whether it's been collected or not. But the difference is we'll just have it deactivated or not activated. Pretty simple, huh? So we got a few steps to do to achieve that. The first thing we're going to do is create a new array of type collectible. Or actually, yeah, collectible temp equals excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back. What we got to do in our code is every time we want to check our collectibles, we got to look at all of our collectibles in our scene. Boom, 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 right? This one, this one, this one, and the 4 others in the other one. Well, every time we load into a scene, we're going to put all those collectibles into an array. All right. And we're going to make just kind of a temporary one that's only going to exist within the scope of this function. So we'll say game object collectibles. So it only exists here. Collectibles in scene. Let's give it a little bit more of a fancy name. And we're going to go ahead and declare and assign in the same line. We're going to say game object dot find objects with tag. You know what? We're going to make a new tag real quick and call it collectible. Oh man, I got 4 collectibles in my scenes. What if I had 100? Would I have to go back and tweak all that? Well, why don't we just see how we can leverage the power of prefabs to help us. So I'm going to go to my prefabs folder, and I'm going to double click on my prefab, and you see we go into this crazy new scene with just my prefab here. We'll see that the object is untagged up there. So we're going to add a tag called collectible. So just go to add tag and make a new one, call it collectible. I've already got one. And then I'm going to set its tag to collectible. And that's how we're going to populate this array or this list of all the collectibles in my scene on every scene load. So now you'll see all my collectibles have the tag of collectible. So that's nice. So why don't we go ahead, and we're going to test this every step of the way. I'm going to go ahead and select my inventory manager. Let's see. Let's make this public so we can see it exist. All right. You know what? The scope here is wrong. All right, we're just going to I'm going to go ahead and make this up here. So all we have to do is say just collectibles and scene. Collectibles and scene, boom. And now we have the right kind of scope to do our debug testing. Because look what it creates. It creates this array for us. We don't have to touch this one. This is just primarily for debugging purposes to make sure we're on the right track. Oh, but nothing happened. My collectibles in the scene didn't get loaded in by tag. Well, why don't we go ahead and fix that? We're going to call check collectibles in our game manager every time a scene is loaded. So we'll say, we'll do all the populate, exit array stuff. Yeah. Then after we position the player, we're going to say inventory manager dot instance dot check collectibles. So every time we load into a scene, we're going to run this function, which right now is just populating an array for us so we can get at all of our collectibles objects in our scene. So let's undo that and try again. All right, so we should see this array populate now. Nice. So let's pause and take a look at our work. So let me zoom in. So you can see we have all the collectibles here. And what's nice is if you click on each one, you can see where they are in our outliner so you can make sure we're getting every single collectible in our array. All right, that's perfect. All right, the next thing we need to do is loop through this array to see if it has a check mark, basically. All right, so it's going to take a little bit of programming to do that. So what we're going to do now is say for int equals 0, we're going to make our nice for loop. I is going to be less than collectibles in scene dot length parentheses I plus plus to increase that. Let's see. Nope, I don't think that needs a function call. It's just a value. All right, so we're going to loop through our array that'll have all the actual collectibles in our current scene. That's the only ones we want to check because we're trying to make them inactive if they've already been collected. So we don't care about all the collectibles in the whole game, only the ones in the scene right now. And what we're going to say is we're going to create a collectible variable so we can get at our collectible class right here for each of our objects in the scene, each of our cheeses. And it's just going to be a variable that'll exist in the scope of this function right here. So we'll call it collectible, and I'll just say collectible temp. And every time we loop through it, we're going to assign it a new value. We're going to gain access to each of the new collectibles, collectible class. Yeah, collectible, right? And we're going to say we're going to set that equal to collectibles in scene, and which one? Well, whichever one's in our current count right now. And then we're going to get component, and we're going to get to that collectible. All right. So every time we loop through our loop our for loop right here, we're only going to look at the certain collectible whose index matches our current loop, and we're just going to assign our collectible. So this basically accesses every collectible's script right here in our that we want to check. Its identifier number and its value, and if it's unique or not. But really only concerned with the identifier value, because after we do that, what we're going to say, we're going to make an if statement next. We're going to say if, what is we call our very first one? If collected items, which is our Boolean, so we're going to look at our nice Boolean list. We're going to say if, what's actually an array, not a list. If inventory, what did we call it? Collected items. If collected items in our scene, collected items, and then which collected items do we want to look at? Well, we're going to look at our collectible temp dot identifier. Wow, I completely butchered that. Identifier number equals true, meaning if this particular collectible in our index, as denoted by the identifier, right here, our identifier number. Let's see, mark collected, check collected, true. Yep, perfect. It's a little bit of a hard read here, but I'll loop us through the code visually in a second. Let me just get it written. Then we're going to say collectibles, collected items in our scene right now, collected items, which one we're currently in our loop, because remember, we're still in this for loop. Dot set active equals false. Actually, I got a little mixed up, didn't I? Our collected items is actually a Boolean, not a game object that we can set active. What we actually need to set inactive in our scene are all of the collectibles that we find every time we load in. So let's go and change this array name. It's easy to get confused. So collectible, because I just did. And I don't want to edit out mistakes though, because these are mistakes that you guys can make. I'll go ahead and make them and tell you why we make them. Uh, so we actually want to set our collectibles in our scene to inactive. So those are all the collectibles upon scene load in our little list here. And then we loop through our little list of collectibles in our scene. And every time we loop through, we get access to its collectible script. So we want to see exactly, let this compile. We want to see exactly what's going on with its identifier number, right? Because what it's going to do is going to loop through. It's going to look at its identifier number. And then it's going to compare it to our inventory items right here. And that identifier is going to point it at which element here to see if it's been collected. And if it's true, right, then we need to make that element not spawn. We need to make that collectible not spawn. And that's basically what our code is doing there. So why don't we test it out? All right. So we'll press play. I'll collect my cheese. We'll leave the cheese on the table there. We'll go to this one. I'll get that cheese. I'm going to leave the cheese on the banister alone. We got all those cheeses. So we see we have some collected and some not. All right, so what should happen is no cheese on the table, no cheese on the table, cheese on the nightstand. Get it. Cheese on the banister. Boom. So now let's go to our next scene. No more cheeses anywheres. Awesome. So that's basically all of our script. Now, it might be a little hard to understand what's going on here, but the basic thing that we need to understand is that this identifier number right here, every time we load into a scene, we can get access to each object's identifier number, compare it to our array of booleans here, and if it sees that this particular part of the boolean or a particular index of our boolean array is marked true, then we just set it to inactive and it won't spawn in our scene. So let's look at what's going on in our hierarchy this time. So I'll just grab that one cheese, go to our next scene, and what should happen is our cheese isn't there, but if we pause and look in our hierarchy, we see that this collectible on my desktop right here, it's still there technically, but we've set it to inactive because we don't want to collect it again. So we're not so much as spawning or instantiating the cheese in. We're just placing our cheese and then turning them off when we don't need them anymore every time we load back into the scene. So that's how our code works. In the next video, we'll go over how we can get UI working with our collectibles.